All right, so welcome to this episode of the ninth grade experience. We're here with the ninth grade principal. It's kind of interesting that we're a couple of weeks away from the end of school and we finally have the ninth grade principal on the ninth grade experience, but it's been a busy year, a crazy hectic year. So we're here today with Mr. Fortier, from his house and my house, and we're just kind of checking in, talking about the school year. So Mr. Fortier, thanks a lot for joining us today on the ninth grade experience.
No problem. Yeah, I agree with you. It's been way too long. I should have been on this thing a long time ago.
I know it was interesting in the summer before we started. Mr. Miller was still the ninth grade principal, like right as we were getting ready to go back to school. And I had the intention to interview him. And then I found out that he was leaving. And then it kind of like they didn't know exactly who it was going to be, or they didn't tell us right away. And then as the year got rolling along, we were doing a lot of focus on our students and stuff there. So as the students have scattered a little bit, we've been talking to a few more of the adults. But yes, it's kind of weird that it's taken this long. Maybe we'll have to do one at the beginning of next year, depending on what we're at, doing that to kind of reintroduce yourself to the ninth graders. But we also have the upcoming eighth graders are also listening to these too. That's been shared with some of the middle schools. So chance to introduce yourself and reintroduce yourself. But as always, we always ask our first question for new guests or first time guests to describe your ninth grade experience. So you don't have to identify the year or the school if you don't want to, but what was your ninth grade experience like?
So my ninth grade experience was a little different because I was in a junior high school. So 7th, 8th, and ninth grade was in that building. So we were kind of like the top dogs, not the incoming freshmen. It was a great year. I really enjoyed it because, again, I was one of the top dogs in there. I was involved in band. So basically every kind of thing that I could deal with band, whether it was marching, concert, jazz band, marching band for like parade band. We did about everything. I played the saxophone, so it was a lot of fun. Like, made a lot of really good friends. I was just really involved. It was a little bit harder for me because that year I'm sharing this, I actually lost my mom that year. She was diagnosed with cancer in my 6th grade year, and then moving forward throughout the years, she got sicker, and then she ended up losing her battle with cancer. So that was a struggle, but I had a lot of really good support from teachers, from the other students, and overall it was a really good year. I think if anything, you want to talk about transitions, like transition from 9th grade to 10th grade was a little bit more rough. Just because, again, it was 10th grade. I was in a brand new school. It kind of feels like, hey, you're a 10th grader, you should be fine. 10th grade was a little bit rougher because it was a bigger school. My district was very similar to the size with the high school. So we had about 700 for my graduating class. So very similar sizes to our classes with Emmaus. So it was a big school. It was moving around. But junior high, again, had really good teachers. I think my favorite teacher was someone who I actually had in 7th grade. And she was my reading teacher, and she was always there to support myself. I had a cousin who was in the same grade, so she was there to support us through the times that we were going through. And just a really good group of teachers that helped us, supported us, and were there for us, not just for educational purposes, but really for the mental health aspect, where kind of talking through everything that was going on with my family.
And that's such a big component right now, since, we're out of the building, our kids are all over the place, that mental, the social, emotional learning piece of it. How did that experience in your ninth grade year, losing your mother, like, did that kind of guide how you look at being a ninth grade principal, and like kind of shape, like, because you kind of know that some of the hardships that a ninth grader can go through, and kind of reflecting on that and kind of looking back to help, put yourself in the shoes of how fragile ninth grade could be?
Absolutely. I mean, anytime that there's any kind of loss or any kind of like major life event, we talk about trauma that students go through. Like, losing a parent is huge. There's other kids that they don't have something to eat. There's so much that kind of compound with that trauma in someone's life bringing them up. So experiencing some of those things definitely puts someone's vision in how they view life and how they view just how they do their job or how they live. It absolutely shapes and affects it. And then also who's there to support, because yeah, I have a really strong family too, so that helped as well. But to
Mhm.
have that support at home as well as at school was one of the reasons that I was able to do as well as I was in school, and then to move on, because I didn't stop at high school. I went off to college, I went into the military, I went into a bunch of different places throughout the world, and it really shaped who I was. And actually, the that experience there in ninth grade with the teachers and through junior high, middle school, really shaped in me the fact that I wanted to become a teacher, wanted to become an educator, and then finally become a principal, where I didn't really know what I wanted to do before then, and actually, I it kind of shaped me later on in life, and while I was in college, like thinking back to my middle school, quote unquote, time in what do I want to do with my life? What do I want to be when I'm finished with college?
And it's interesting, like that you had that kind of like epiphany, like in the middle school level, at the ninth grade level. We talk so much about like, we want to make sure that students understand that like ninth grade counts and that it's important in your overall development. And you had this experience where you were able to basically maybe not give your whole direction for what you wanted to do, because obviously you went off and did other stuff as well, but it kind of shaped it and formed kind of what you were thinking about doing and kind of how you wanted to proceed with the rest of your life, which is kind of an interesting, like, thing to think about, that, we have a lot of ninth graders that are sitting at home now and wondering what their ninth grade year meant. And then we have a lot of eighth graders that are getting ready to come up and kind of trying to figure it all out and how it kind of works for them.
Absolutely. I mean, it, unfortunately, the world is full of surprises, and we think we have a plan, and then something happens. And for most of us that are teaching, 9/11 is one of our big defining moments. Like, I can remember exactly where I was 9/11. I can remember what class I was sitting, what university I was going to, the time frame that it happened. I actually watched on TV the second plane go into the second tower and the towers come down. Like, those are the kind of things that you remember. Now we're dealing with COVID, where we're at home for over 2 months now, working on our third month being at home and at stay at home and trying to be safe. And whether we know someone who has experienced the disease or not, experienced the virus, it's still shaping who we are. And the fact of everything is still up in the air on when does the when does Pennsylvania go from a red phase down to a yellow phase, down to a green phase, and then back to normal. And just what does that mean for the rest of the summer? What does that mean for next year? What does that mean for right now? And the seniors, like, I was the assistant principal for the juniors last year. So their seniors, they're graduating. They have a completely different senior year than any other senior in almost history, probably of Emmaus. That never have they been out of school for this long and graduating and coming up with different ways for us to reach kids in a virtual way. We couldn't do that 10 years ago. We couldn't do that maybe 5 years ago. This is something that is completely new, and the flexibility that it takes from a student, whether they're in eighth grade, ninth grade, 10th grade, senior, 11th grade, whatever grade you're talking about, the flexibility that students, teachers, administrators need to have right now, just in education, is baffling. And the unknown is still just there. It's just so unknown in how we move forward. It all depends on what phase are we in? What can we do? How is social distancing being implemented?
Yeah, getting back to what you were talking about 9/11, it's really interesting. I remember back to the beginning of the school year when we did, I believe it was you, we did like a like moment of silence over the loudspeaker for 9/11.
Yep.
And it's funny, like our freshmen now were not alive when that happened. And they can't like they get it, but they don't get it. And like I remember after that, like kids were like, through no fault of their own, but they were like kind of like moving around and they didn't quite get it. So we had to have that conversation. And I always would talk to kids about like they don't have that, they didn't have that like defining moment, that one like generational moment. Like, our parents or grandparents would be like, I remember where I was when JFK was assassinated, like that
Mhm.
kind of thing. And then we always had 9/11 in our age group, but now they finally have that like defining moment. Like they'll look back on this in 2040 and be like, I remember the 2020 was the year where we were out of school for 3 months, or if you're in
Mhm.
the class of 2020. So it's really interesting, like the perspective that students can gain on different world events and kind of trying to figure out how they fit into those types of events. Because we all assume as teachers that like, oh, everyone knows about 9/11 because we were alive through it. But that we're at the age now where kids are not, they don't get it unless you teach it to them.
Yeah, and it's really, I hate to say it, but I don't want to be morbid or anything like that, but 9/11, we lost over 2,000 lives in that day. With COVID, and again, I hate to bring up history, but we've gotten to the 100,000 mark where we've had 100,000, at least 100,000 deaths from COVID-19. That's huge. That's astronomical. Over 1.5 million people have been affected, tested positive in the United States alone at this point today with this virus. And it is something that is going to define a lot of people. And I don't want people to not understand of the level of severity that something like this is going to affect and how it's going to affect us moving forward. So it, yes, 9/11 was a tragic because it was something that it was specific. It was a terrible act of violence on the account of a handful of people. This virus is something that has basically swept the whole entire world, and that we are working to do everything we can to keep students safe, to keep parents safe, to keep teachers and the community as safe as possible by following some guidelines to make sure that when we get back to school that we're safe, when we get back into the place, we're a safe community, and we're not going to continue to have people get sick, die, or have a tragic end.
And it's interesting. I'm sure right now people that are listening are wondering, since you kind of mentioned it, like, so what are we going to do next year? And the answer to that is we don't know yet. We're still
We,
in the planning phases for it. I'm sure there are lots of ideas being thrown around, things that we're not really can discuss like
Mhm.
in the public yet. But
Correct.
it'll be really interesting to see what eventually the plan is. But not going all into that, just taking a look back before the shutdown, or you can even include this stuff in the shutdown too. But what was, as your first year as a ninth grade assistant principal, was there something that surprised you or kind of caught you off guard about ninth grade students, or what you kind of encountered this year?
To be honest, like I think the biggest thing that surprised me that shouldn't have surprised me was the level of just how some students got themselves into a specific amount of drama, and then let other people affect who they are and how they react. So I think if I could give advice to any upcoming eighth grader or ninth graders now, is to not have someone else write their story. Because when someone says something about if student A says something about student B, and then student B gets upset about it because it's not a nice thing, they shouldn't be saying those things. However, when student B then reacts in a negative way, then it ramps everything up, and it's all about how um, their perception is, whether it's on social media, whether it's so and so said this, and most of the time the things that are being said are complete lies. So being able to recognize that and be able to go back and say, listen, it's just lies, and to let some of that either go, or to talk to a trusted adult first before reacting or having to have that conversation with the student. Because as soon as you go in and you go at student B, who's had something bad said about them, goes and talks to student A, they are automatically defensive. They're automatically have their guard up. It's not going to be an easy conversation. It's a conversation that needs to be had with an adult who is able to see objectively about what is going on in their surroundings and not just take something to the next level. Because we're human. We are human beings that have a level of pride in who we are and what our name or what our being is, and to let someone else affect us to that point where we do something negatively is just going to get a whole bunch of people either hurt, in trouble, or in danger. So it's a better idea to have that conversation with a trusted adult. It doesn't have to be your assistant principal. It doesn't have to be your counselor. It could be a teacher. It could be someone that is going to be able to help you work through things logically and see truth. Because just because you feel a way doesn't discount your feeling. You're definitely having that feeling of hurt, feeling of being betrayed, feeling of the fact that the person is no longer your friend, or if they were your friend, they wouldn't be saying some of these things. They would be sticking up for you. Those are all true feelings. However, some of those things are like the telephone game or whisper down the lane game, whichever one you know. They say something, it gets misconstrued, it gets put out of whack, and then you're taking the advice of somebody who knows nothing of what's going on, or they just want to stir the pot. So that's really my advice for any 8th or ninth grader, is to really focus in on what's true. And then if you would like to have some sort of a conversation with somebody, do it with a trusted adult, not with a posse, not with a group of friends, because again, it just gets people's defenses up and it doesn't turn out well ever.
Have you noticed during the shutdown, like have people been reporting any of that stuff online, or is that just something that you saw a lot in the building? I'm just kind of curious as to like if you on your end have noticed like any sort of I don't know, cyber harassment is kind of the term, but I
Yeah.
guess that's what it would be right now. But have you
Yeah.
noticed that that has kind of kept up even in the time that we've been out?
I haven't seen as much of that. It was definitely more prevalent in the building when someone was able to actually go up and confront someone. Um, I'm sure, unfortunately, I am not naive to know that it stopped happening and it's not happening.
Yeah.
Um, but it doesn't get reported up to the the administration as often. Whereas we see something brewing, or teachers see, other students see things, confrontations happening, and they're visible. So that's when it comes more to our attention. We would prefer to know about it before something happens and someone gets into a confrontation, that whether it's verbal or physical. I would always say that it's better for an adult, whether it's your parents, whether it needs to be an adult that can think a little bit more through the logical piece and is kind of outside of the actual incident. But no, I haven't seen as much of it since we've been out of school, in the school closure, and been in the virtual world, as much.
If we do happen to start off this way next year, do you have anything that you've kind of picked up on or tips as the ninth grade principal that could help students to establish a good routine at the start of next school year?
Yeah, I would say that biggest thing for them establishing the routine is to make sure that they are basically like, get to know the building, get to know it as well as you can. We don't want being on time for classes is something that is really important. Uh, I hate to say that, but it was a big issue last year with some of our ninth graders getting to class on time, and notice that they have to get from one place to another and be in class ready to go on time. So I would say, know the building, make sure you're getting from one place to another. Don't stop and socialize um, throughout the day in the hallways, because it's just going to get yourself in trouble. Um, if you're socializing, make sure you're walking and talking. Figure out lunch times is a good time for you to like hang out with friends and socialize. So over the summer, make sure you're contacting with friends when schedules come out to say when's your lunch, um, and kind of like enjoy school. If you have a problem, talk to your counselor. Mr. McInerney and Mrs. Demchek are fantastic when they come. They've had kids. They've either had kids in our district or had kids that have recently graduated and gone through the high school drama. They've have at least 30 years of experience between the two of them, dealing with different problems and scenarios that have come up. So between them and myself, their teachers, um, adults, find a trusted adult, find a relationship with an adult in your classes where you can trust them and you can confide in them if you're having a problem. If you don't find that, then talk to your parents, but don't try to handle the situations on your own. It's not a good recipe for success.
Couple final questions here. So I know it's kind of a weird end to the school year, but if you had one hope, like what do you hope that a ninth grader looks like at the end of ninth grade?
Uh, for me, it would really be that they get as many credits as much as they can out of the year, build the relationships that they have with new friends. One of the things that students are dealing with, and I dealt with from my ninth to 10th grade, is that we had two junior highs in my uh, ninth grade, 10th grade experience. So two junior highs going into the high school with a lot of students. So you got to meet people from the opposing junior high and got to build new relationships. So these students are coming from IRE or LMMS or outside in either a charter school or a Catholic school or a parochial school or a private school. They're coming from all different areas. So you're going to build new relationships. You're going to build new friends. Continue to cultivate them. Just because we're social distancing doesn't mean that we can't FaceTime someone, we can't Skype, we can't set up a Google Meet, we can't set something up that you can actually speak and talk with them and reconnect. Um, my biggest thing is connections. Like if you have communication and you have connection, then you can get through any problems that come up throughout your 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade year. 10th grade isn't a joke. There's usually a couple more electives that are required in 10th grade year that aren't required in the other years, like driver's ed, health. You still have a well-fit class, but that's aquatics. So those are three things that come up between your 9th and 10th grade year. And you need to pass those classes. You need to get them because they're graduation requirements, and you need to start building up your repertoire and thinking about where are you going to go? What are you going to do when you're finished with high school? Yes, you're in 9th grade and moving to 10th grade. You still have 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. But everything that you do at high school and in the community, it counts. So be smart, think before you do, and just really focus in. If you can take anything, is to make sure you communicate when you're having a rough time, whether it's feeling anxious about something, feeling depressed about something, just feeling worried, just basic things. Talk to somebody, find a trusted adult, find a trusted friend, and don't be upset if they try to give you a little bit of additional help or they can't help you and they say maybe you need to go talk to an adult. That's a good thing. That means that you're going to get the help and you're going to get the support that you need to be successful throughout your life. Because there's not a single person, whether it's been an adult that's been on this podcast, there's been a student that's been on this podcast, or even any one of those trusted leaders, uh, trusted leaders, trusted adults, even people that you see that you kind of idolize, whether it's a singer, an actor, or a professional in your life, they've all received help at some way or another. And it's not a bad thing. We are a community. We need to help each other. We need to work together to make what we do the best product and the best community that we have.
And last question here. So for our eighth graders coming up to ninth grade next year, is there something or things they can be looking out for over the summer? I know with orientation and all those other things, we're not really sure how that's going to look, but anything that they could be looking for or potentially looking at coming up for the summer?
Obviously, we want to do an orientation. We want to do an orientation as much as possible if it's face to face. If that's not possible, then we'll do something virtually. We will, whenever we get back into the building, whenever that is. And again, I always have hope that we're going to be there in late August. The first day of school is supposed to be this day, and then we're face to face. That is always my hope. That is always my goal. I want to get back into the building as bad as anybody. I enjoy being there. But basically look out for us. Make sure you kind of look at the orientation no matter what, whether it's face to face or it's online. Make sure you look at that. Make sure you go through that whole presentation with your parents so that you know the responsibilities that you have coming in. Another thing, I know it's a long and boring document. It's important that you understand the fine print. So our discipline code is something that comes out and we try to revamp every single year. It is important for students to understand that discipline code because that's what you're being held responsible for. Your student handbook is another piece. It has a little bit of that discipline code in it. So please make sure that you read through those documents. Again, I know it's not the most insightful, engaging reads that you're there, but you really need to know what you're being held accountable for. It's kind of like you get a new phone or an update to your phone and they give you the fine print and you have to agree to it. If you don't read it and they change something up, you're still held accountable for it. And the last thing that I want anyone is to be surprised if they do something and they're like, I didn't know that I needed to do that. So please make sure you read those two documents. Make sure you go through the orientation and utilize the supports that you have in the building, whether it's from middle school and you have a good connection with an adult back there, being able to email back and forth, build the new relationships with your teachers and the adults in the building at the high school. That's my advice.
So great advice there from Mr. Fortier, who will once again be back in his role as the ninth grade principal next year. So look for him near the horseshoe there at the top, near the athletic office, his office, unless they're moving it around. Some years they do. Nope. He says no. So they're not moving it around next year. So look for him near the horseshoe where the athletic office is. So Mr. Fortier, thanks a lot for joining us today. I really appreciate your time and good luck to closing out the rest of the school year here.
Thank you, Mr. Stutchko. I appreciate the time and appreciate you inviting me on.